Many will argue that The Last of Us has gained meme status with the number of re-releases that it's seen. The Last of Us 1, for example, it's been released 3 times. The first game on PS3 came out on June 14th, 2013. Then came the remaster, which was published and launched about a year later on July 29th, 2014. And keep in mind that there was no upgrade program whatsoever, and they were initially planning to charge $60 for it, full price. But then they did do a $10 price drop, and it became $50. But even then, many would argue that was too expensive. This remaster came a year after the PS3 launch, and while the remaster did add, 60 FPS, and it did elevate the graphics for PlayStation 4, charging full price and not allowing people to upgrade at a cheaper price point was just not a good look. And then The Last of Us Part 2 came out on June 19th, 2020 at a $60 price point. And then not long after, 2 years later on September 2nd, 2022, came The Last of Us Part 1, which is a remake of The Last of Us. And they charge a full-priced $70 for that on PlayStation 5. The game did eventually come out on Steam in a really rough state, and they charged $60 for that. And if you go to those respective stores right now, for some reason on Steam it's still $60, and on PS5 it's still $70. At least the remaster had the benefit of factions carrying over, but Last of Us Part 1 did not have factions, any multiplayer component, so they charged more for a package that was ultimately less substantial than the initial releases of The Last of Us and The Last of Us Remastered. Yes, the graphics are beautiful and the gameplay was enhanced, not to dismiss the merits of Part 1 and the remake, but it was overall a less substantial package that they charged too much for. And keep in mind that with The Last of Us Part 1, it's not a complete remake like the Resident Evil remakes, for example, where they're basically new games based off of the old ones. The Last of Us Part 1 is beat by beat the same game as The Last of Us 1 and Remastered, but the remade assets and the sort of remade gameplay that basically takes Part 2's gameplay and infuses it into Part 1, like all that stuff's definitely been overhauled, but it is still essentially the same game, the same story, the same, cutscenes and whatnot. You are playing the same experience ultimately, just a better version of it. And now there's a rumor going around that The Last of Us Part 2 may soon get a remaster. And given the past history of how stuff like that has been handled, Naughty Dog fans and fans of The Last of Us are kind of tired of this cycle happening over and over again. And this is more than a rumor, I'd say, because the source of this is none other than Gustavo Santaolalla, who is the composer for The Last of Us. He was interviewed by this YouTube channel, Blender, and during the interview, somebody brought up how it was really cool to see Gustavo Santaolalla in the game, The Last of Us Part 2, as a cameo. There's actually footage of this online. Here's a video of the intro portion of The Last of Us Part 2, where as you walk around, you can find this character model of Gustavo Santaolalla sitting on this rocking chair playing the banjo. A neat little thing that they did. And so when one of the hosts brought that up to Gustavo Santaolalla, Gustavo expressed excitement about that, and also he let slip that there's a new version of The Last of Us Part 2 where you'll be able to interact with that character and request song changes so he can play a tune different from the one he plays by default in the original The Last of Us Part 2. And then he said, I cannot say much more than that. So while he didn't strictly say The Last of Us Part 2 is getting a remaster, he did let slip that there's a new version of that game where there's a new feature being added. It might as well be confirmation that The Last of Us Part 2 is getting a remaster, which likely means enhanced graphics, which likely means some little gameplay tweaks and additions and little extra things like what Gustavo Santaolalla is suggesting here, where his character will have some dialogue and you'll be able to change the song that he plays and stuff like that. It seems pretty clear to me that this is happening. It's like a 90% chance that this is true. Hell, 99 I'd say, because Gustavo Santaolalla is the composer for The Last of Us, and him letting this slip is close to official. Now, it's important to note that The Last of Us Part 2 is already playable on PlayStation 5 through backwards compatibility. And in fact, following the launch of the PlayStation 5, Naughty Dog released a performance patch for PlayStation 5 so that The Last of Us Part 2 could run at 60 frames per second. On PlayStation 4, given the graphics fidelity of Last of Us Part 2, that game ran at 30 FPS on PS4, on PS5. It can now run at 60 frames per second. It still looks gorgeous on PlayStation 5. It might as well not need a remaster, many might argue, and yet now we're learning that there is a strong likelihood that the game might get a remaster. And so if you go through social media right now and look at reactions from people, a lot of people are just like, why? Why are we doing this again? So here's a tweet by Hunter stating that The Last of Us Part 2 remaster on PlayStation 5 might have just been leaked by the game's composer. And if you scroll down, a lot of people are just like, really? Do we really need this? Now, how are they remastering a 3-year-old game, one that holds up on PlayStation 5, especially with that performance patch? And then if you look at the quote tweets, a lot of people are suggesting that Naughty Dog is just ignoring a lot of other beloved IPs, and a lot of manpower and resources are being put in projects like The Last of Us Part 1, which some people still question whether that remake was necessary at all. While it does bring its visual parity closer to The Last of Us Part 2, because the visuals did change a decent amount with the graphics upgrade that The Last of Us Part 2 received, and Part 1 and Part 2 now visually are a lot more similar than, one remastered versus two. It's the pricing point of everything, the business model of it, alongside the fact that other IPs from Naughty Dog have been neglected, and seeing constant releases of The Last of Us when there are 2 parts to this game and we're seeing 5 releases in total. It's a lot. It's starting to feel like Skyrim levels of porting and releases and charging money for these 2 games. And so tweets like these, where The Last of Us is being gorged while the Jak and Daxter series is being starved, have gone viral. People are wondering how a game that's barely 3 years old and that still holds up really well is getting a remaster. Jak and Daxter community members are not happy about this because it feels like that IP, which many people are hoping gets revived, is being ignored. And then there are tweets like this: I want you all to look me dead in the eyes and say modern PlayStation brand is not the most boring, creatively bankrupt it's ever been. Gaining a lot of traction and going viral. 5 games in a series with 2 games, unreal. This tweet also gained quite a bit of traction. So this is the level of discourse that's happening right now. With The Last of Us Part 1, you can at least argue that visually, there's a continuity between Part 1 and Part 2. With The Last of Us Part 2 remastered, or whatever it ends up being called, this is one of those things where what is it going to add to the experience? I guess, they haven't announced it, and we don't know exactly how much they're adding to the remaster, and we also don't know the pricing model, so it's too early to judge, but it doesn't feel like they're going to do anything so substantial with it that it's going to justify, if they do this, a full price. And that's the concern, the pricing and business model of all of this, given past history of all of the Last of Us releases. If they charge full price for this, there's going to be a lot of backlash. That is guaranteed. I personally don't believe that The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered would be priced at $70 for PlayStation 5. I would hope. I think Naughty Dog might be able to get away with this if they do offer an upgrade program where for something like $5 to $10, you're able to take the PlayStation 4 version of The Last of Us Part 2 and upgrade it to the remaster and carry over everything. Then we're good. But if they say, unfortunately, people who bought The Last of Us Part 2 are going to have to buy the remaster again, and we're charging $60 to $70 for it, that's not going to make the community happy, and a lot of people are going to call that out, because that would be, I think, a pretty scummy business model and a pretty ungrateful way to treat people who bought The Last of Us Part 2 on launch day or during the launch period. And for those who haven't bought the original The Last of Us Part 2 and would be experiencing the game for the first time through the remaster, the price point of this game, if it's just a remaster, and that's what it's going to be, there's no way they're going to remake The Last of Us Part 2 just 3 years after launch, I would hope. So this is going to be a remaster. The price point has to be, for first-time players, lowered as well. They cannot charge $70 for new players. I think it has to be $50 at most for those people. Given that The Last of Us Part 2, just the base version on PlayStation 4, is $40 at the moment, I think $50 base price point for the remaster for PC and PS5 players, and again, that $10 upgrade program, that I think would be the sweet spot to justify the remaster without it drawing backlash. And I want to keep my fingers crossed that Naughty Dog, Sony, and PlayStation are going to be thoughtful about those kinds of things. But then you look back at what happened with The Last of Us that was released on PlayStation 3, and then the remaster that came out a year later where there was no upgrade program. But then again, times have changed, and so I want to hope that they've learned that with the continuity of platforms from PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 5, they have to maintain the continuity across releases like remasters as well and make it fair for people who have already bought the game. But that's one of those areas where Sony and PlayStation, the Last of Us franchise, has not been particularly good at. So if you're expecting the worst, I wouldn't blame you. But there's no confirmed details at this point, so it's too early to judge how they're going to handle this remaster. I guess one last thing worth noting is that because The Last of Us Part 1 is now out on PC, it goes without saying that they are planning to release The Last of Us Part 2 on PC at one point so that PC players get that continuity of narrative and are able to play both of those games on the PC platform. And I think that's probably a big part of why they're doing a Last of Us Part 2 remaster, so that they can bring the best version of The Last of Us 2 to PC players, which is fine. You know, the more accessible these games can be, the better. The more platforms it can be on, the better. Just have an upgrade program. If you have that, then you can mitigate a lot of backlash. An upgrade program is what was missing between Last of Us 1 and Last of Us Remastered, or between Last of Us 1 and Remastered and Part 1, the remake. And so, yeah, they've got to just stop with the constant charging people for upgraded versions of games that they already own, and doing so at full price in a way that just feels like they're really milking, Last of Us fans and players. So I hope they put all of that into consideration. I suppose only time will tell how all of this will play out. A lot of what I've talked about here is speculation. All we got right now is the hint that Gustavo Santaolalla dropped, I think unintentionally, that there is likely a Last of Us Part 2 remaster of sorts on the horizon. Let's see how that's handled on the part of the publishers and the developers. In the meantime, though, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the prospect of a Last of Us Part 2 remaster, what your ideal pricing and business model would be to justify this, and whether you're excited about the prospect of The Last of Us Part 2, likely this remastered version, coming to PC so that PC players can continue with the story through Part 2. Share your thoughts on all of this in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.